welcome back to Guerrilla Politics, and again, thank you for joining us this Sunday morning. Our guest this morning is Tom Ryan. Tom's been on the show a number of times, and he is currently the chair of the Madison County Democratic Party. One of the topics that we've been talking about, Tom, is Democrats and Republicans working together. And this debt ceiling thing of doing away, it's become weaponized, doing away with the debt ceiling, so that Democrats can't hold up Republican legislation as easily, and vice versa when they're in power. What do you think about that?
Well, it just seems kind of silly. I heard an NPR piece on it the other day, and they said there was no debt ceiling until the First World War.
Right.
And then they instituted it then. But I mean, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the debt ceiling is. It just means that when you use your credit card and buy something, and then when the credit card payment comes in the mail, that's the debt ceiling. You've got to pay your bills. So all that is paying the bills that Congress has already authorized expenditures for.
Okay.
So it's they always like to talk about personal responsibility. Well, this is a congressional responsibility. If they're going to spend the money, they've got to pay the bill.
Democrat or Republican?
Either way. Yeah, it's just kind of silly. You know, it seems like if you've authorized the expenditure, they ought to just say you've automatically raised the debt limit to cover that authorization.
Tom, as chairman of the Democrat Party, I'm sure that you, of course, paying close attention to the Senate race coming up, and there's been recent laws passed about what's called crossover voting.
Right.
Could you talk to the audience about what is crossover voting exactly?
Okay.
And what's allowable and disallowable in terms of?
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, crossover voting is it's a brand new law. They just passed it a few months ago, and what it is, it prohibits anyone who voted in a party primary election from voting in the opposite party's primary runoff election. Okay, so if you, for instance, ran in the Democratic, if you voted in the Democratic primary, you can't vote in the Republican primary runoff election. Okay, and I've talked with the Secretary of State's office, and they're talking about prosecuting people if they voted in the Democratic primary and now they're going to vote in the Republican primary runoff. He wants their names and he's going to prosecute them, and the penalties they're looking at is a Class C felony, which carries up to 10 years in prison and or up to a $15,000 fine. So this is pretty serious, and in the message that he sent out to the boards of registrars and the sheriffs and the probate judges, he didn't say anything about, okay, you guys screwed up in the last election because they didn't write down on the voters list if they voted Democrat or Republican. So the election officials, who were trained, by the way, didn't do it right. So now he wants to prosecute the voters who have had absolutely no training, and he didn't give any guidance to the election officials to say, hey, if your list indicates that somebody voted in the Democratic primary, you need to educate them and warn them that they're ineligible to vote. And if they did vote, they would have to vote a provisional ballot anyway, which wouldn't count because they've already voted. It would be prohibited. It's an illegal vote.
Now,
but he's talking about prosecuting instead of prevention.
At one time, the Republican Party encouraged crossover voting. They did in the 1986 governor's election. And it was explained to me back in those days that it was like, say, Lord Saban choosing the Alabama lineup and then going over and choosing the Auburn lineup.
Right, exactly.
And that is, or choosing the deacons in your church and going and choosing the deacons in another church.
Right. I agree with the premise, but I don't agree that people ought to be punished criminally for doing that. That's way overkill.
But the Democrats had a rule against it. It's not actually a law,
right,
but there's a rule. But it's very difficult to enforce under that scenario.
Yeah.
How do you see this U.S. Senate race shaking up? We've got about a minute left, and is this fight between Senator Strange and Judge Moore, are there going to be such bitter feelings that the Democrats might actually have a shot with Doug Jones in December in the special election?
Oh yeah, I think Doug has an excellent chance of winning this election. He's got some money coming in. He's got a good organization. He's got very good name recognition, at least from the northern part of the state. I think maybe he's not quite so much in the southern part of the state. But he's got an excellent chance, and especially considering who the candidates are on the Republican side. You've got Luther Strange Luther, who was a lobbyist for years in D.C., and then comes down here and gets himself elected. And then we got Roy Moore, who's, we know Roy Moore.
Okay. Thank you so much, and we'll be back We'll be back with our parting shot in the history lesson.